Robin here from Cheese from Scratch. So today I have a contamination to show you. So this is too good not to share because I want to really talk to you guys about when you get contamination and what you can do with that cheese afterwards, because sometimes it's garbage and sometimes it's not. So today I'm going to show you a contaminated cheese and I'm going to show you what I'm going to go and make it into. I made this cheese yesterday. It's a nice fresh cheese, but when I took it, it was supposed to be a Gouda. When I took it out of the press last night, I was like, oh, this is spongy, and that's never a good sign right off the bat. But it was late, so I put it in my brine. I was like, I'll deal with it in the morning. I take it out of the brine this morning, and it's still very spongy, so I cut it open, and it is yeast contaminated. So there are some mechanical holes in there. There's one, but a lot of these are actually yeast holes. And so the reason I can tell that they are yeast holes is because they are uniform, they are shiny, they are kind of throughout the whole cheese, and also, this is really important, is it smells like yeast. And this is super important because there's two reasons that you can possibly get or two main reasons that you can possibly get something called early blowing. So early blowing is within the first couple days of making cheese. Your cheese puffs up, it feels spongy, there's something going on with it. This is called early blowing. There's also a thing where it's called late blowing, where a couple months down the road you're seeing your cheese puff up and it previously hadn't. But today we're talking about early blowing. So there's two main reasons why you can get early blowing. And the first one, I know it's a terrible word, a terrible term. The first reason for early blowing, and the most common, especially in homesteaders' kitchens, because we are baking sourdough. I know you're all baking sourdough. If you're not baking sourdough, you're probably not making cheese, because it's like the gateway. It's the gateway to all homesteading, is sourdough. Anyway, so it's really common to get yeast contamination in cheeses, especially in homestead cheese making, because we have so much yeast going on in the kitchen. We have other kinds of ferments going on. Maybe we're trying to experiment a little bit with natural cultures that also have some yeast in them. There's just yeast naturally present in raw milk as well, and it just needs a chance to thrive. So one really big common cause of early blowing is yeast contamination. The second really big cause of early blowing is coliform contamination. And you can see why it's really important that you know that you have yeast contamination versus coliform contamination. Because if you have coliform contamination, you can potentially make yourself really sick. And I have had coliform contamination once. It was actually in a mozzarella cheese. So mozzarella, because it's heated to such a high temperature, this was after I had stretched it, because it's heated to such a high temperature, it kills all of your bacteria in there. So that is basically an empty ecology cheese. So I had left that cheese out on the counter for a couple hours after I stretched it. I came back, it was puffed up, and it had all these little pinholes in it. And they were really uniform, tiny pinholes throughout, and I was like, oh, that is coliform. And I actually got a little bit sick off of it, so usually I wouldn't even touch it. But I actually was like, oh, well, maybe it's okay. And I took a little taste of it, and I didn't have to take very much more than a taste, and I felt sick. So it's really important that if you have any question about the safety of it, you just toss it, because you can make yourself really sick. Cheese is perfect for growing bacteria. Our milk is perfect for growing bacteria. That is why it makes such good cheese. So you have to make sure you're growing the right bacteria. But today we are going to talk about yeast contamination, because I know that this cheese is contaminated with yeast. It's got nice big holes. I kind of caught it a little bit early because I put it into the salt, so it could have, if I had left it out overnight, it probably would have puffed up significantly and continued to kind of ferment. But because I put it into that salt, that slowed everything down a little bit, and so it's less it's less easy to tell that it is contaminated versus does it just have a bunch of mechanical holes. And so that's a question that you might come across at home where you're like, is this contaminated or is this mechanical holes? And the main reason that I'm telling that this cheese is contaminated is because there are a lot of shiny uniform holes throughout it. There are some definite mechanical holes, but it's difficult when a cheese is contaminated to really understand which ones are the mechanical holes because everything kind of melds together, right? So there was a little yeast there and it popped a little bubble. It made that mechanical hole bigger as well. But this is definitely yeast contaminated because it smells like beer. It smells yeasty. So what am I going to do with this cheese? So yeast contaminated cheese, if you are absolutely 100% sure that it is a yeast contaminated cheese, it smells like yeast, you can go ahead and eat that cheese. They're not very good to age. I've tried aging yeast contaminated cheeses before. They don't do well to age, but they are like an okay fresh cheese. They're not my favorite. They do taste like beer, but you can rescue it and you don't have to throw it away. You don't have to give it to the pigs just yet if you don't want to. So today what I am going to do with this yeast contaminated cheese is I'm going to stretch it into mozzarella balls and I'm going to put them in oil and we're going to eat them fresh over the next couple days. This is a lot of cheese though. This was probably about a 5-pound block of cheese, so it's quite a bit of mozzarella, so I'm going to have to freeze some of it because we just can't eat all of that. So it is going to taste like beerish. I don't really, it might be okay on pizza and stuff, but I think it's best just to kind of eat it as like an appetizer with like some oil and stuff. So that's what I'm going for here. So whatever you do choose, keep in mind that that yeast, especially in this case because that salt slowed it down and stuff, but that yeast is still going to be fermenting this cheese, right? So because this yeast is still fermenting this cheese, it's going to continue to get more yeasty, more yeasty, more yeasty. So by stretching it in hot water, I'm actually stopping that process because the yeast will not like the hot water, and that will also slow that down, if not stop it. So I'm going to add, I've cut up these into little cubes here. I'm going to add that into here. So it's important to make sure you can actually stretch your cheese first before you go ahead and boil a whole pot of water and start stretching everything. So to make sure that you can actually stretch your cheese, take a little bit of really hot water, like 130-degree water, and go ahead and see if you can put it in that water and stretch it over a few minutes. So I love naturally acidified mozzarella. It is my very favorite kind of mozzarella, and the reason for that is because it's so pillowy and nice and beautiful. When you make citric acid acidified mozzarella, it's fine, it tastes good, it's all good, but it just doesn't have that pillowiness, that soft pillowiness that you get from naturally acidified mozzarella, and I love working with it. This definitely isn't going to have the nice taste of a regular naturally acidified mozzarella because it has that beer kind of flavor with it, but lots of people like put their cheese, brine their cheese in beer to kind of get that flavor. So here we've just done the work for ourselves. We're making a whole new type of cheese. So I've got some hot water here. It was just before boiling point that I pulled it off the stove. And so I've added my cubes into the pot. And you can see they are starting to stretch. You're going to need a few more minutes under the water here. As you can see, I've already done a few. I didn't have them in any cold water though. So I've got a bowl of cold water here now, of ice water, that I'm going to put these next ones into so that they don't, it kind of stops them from, like see for example, I made this one. It was a nice round ball and now it's a pancake. So if you give yourself some nice little ice water here, that will stop it from pancaking and it will stay in a nice ball. So this is getting ready here. I'm going to show you. So it's so nice and pillowy to work with naturally acidified mozzarella. It's so much nicer. Like, it probably kind of looks the same as when you make mozzarella, but it feels different. And that's all about the feel when you're a cheese maker. All about the feel. So I'm gonna throw this in ice water now, this little ball. The nice thing about these too is they're already salted, so I don't have to put them in like any salt because there's already salt in this cheese because I salted it all night. I'm gonna get a wooden spoon. So the reason I think that I got yeast contaminated, and so there's all sorts of different reasons, and I have a yeast versus cheese highlight on my Instagram where I kind of talk about it a little bit, because I firmly believe that you can still bake bread and make cheese. You don't have to give up either of them, even though I make like a ton of cheese and I don't make a ton of bread anymore because I had so many yeast contaminations. But I actually firmly believe that you can still do both. You just have to be careful, and I just wasn't willing to be careful. But the reason that I think that I got this yeast contamination is not because I had any contaminants in my kitchen, but I think that I actually heated, it was Gouda, so it was working with a mesophilic culture, a low loving culture. And I think what I did is I accidentally left the burner on and accidentally heated my cheese to too high of a heat because I wasn't using a thermometer yesterday. My thermometer has been broken for a couple months actually, and that's been serving me fine because I kind of know what the temperatures are just by feel. But you can see that I can kind of like stretch this mozzarella with my hands. So I'm pretty sure over the years of stretching mozzarella, I have no nerve endings left in my hands. That's my diagnosis. It's my nursing diagnosis, that my nerve endings have all been damaged. So it doesn't bother me to really stretch cheese under hot water. So that obviously is probably maybe part of my problem. Anyway, so I think that it got too hot, and I think that that was the culprit behind why this got yeast contaminated, because my regular culture, the one that I had added, the one that I wanted to kind of thrive, it was damaged or even killed during the cheese making process, and then that just left it open to whatever else wanted to come in there. And yeast is a beast. Oh, that rhymes. Yeast is a beast. It will get into your cheese if you let it. And I have another cheese going today, so I'm being very careful. I have a Colby going today, so I'm being very careful to not like to wash my hands between touching that pot, because I don't want to have two yeast contaminated cheeses. Look how nice and pillowy that is. I just love working with. Alright, so now, like these, I can store them in the fridge, and because it's such a high heat that they get stretched at, I don't really have to worry about that yeast taking off. Mozzarella doesn't last that long anyways. I'm probably gonna freeze a lot of this because this is too much to eat. I'll probably freeze quite a bit of it, but so I'll just have a little jar of mozzarella balls and then the rest will be frozen. You have to be careful you don't overwork this too, because that will make it rubbery. Nobody likes rubbery cheese. So just as much as you need to. This piece will probably be rubbery. I worked it a little bit much. Hi guys! So it's been a few days since my mozzarella Gouda debacle, and so I had taken a few of the little mozzarella balls and put them in oil, and I've had it stored in the fridge. That's olive oil, so that's why it's all solid in there, but as soon as I let it come back to room temperature, it will be liquid again. And then I had taken quite a few of them, and I had salted them in my 18% brine for a little while, and then pulled them out, and now they will be nice and easy to shred if that's what I want to do, and then I can put that shredded cheese in the freezer, or I can freeze them just like this. They taste really good. I was just eating one after I oversalted them a little bit, and they don't taste yeasty at all anymore. So oversalting will help you with that, but all in all, it's really good. So I'm going to show you where I bit here, but you can see there's no yeast holes in there. So that has stopped the yeast, the stretching in the hot water. stop the yeast in its tracks. So that's really good. Yeah, so I'm gonna freeze this stuff. We're gonna eat this stuff fresh. We'll probably eat it for dinner tonight because I don't want to keep it a ton of time. And yeah. Thank you guys for watching my video. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. New video every Monday all about milk cows, cheese making, homestead cheese making, all things to do with living on a homestead and making cheese and milking cows, all of that stuff. So make sure you subscribe. I love to hear your guys' comments below. Even though I'm trying to be better about answering them, I do read them. So comment below and I will read your comment and I will answer them eventually, once I learn how to manage my time better. All right, guys, we'll see you next Monday. Bye!